Sorry about that.
Come on, Robin.
Dorothy, I'm on your side.
We're going to trade off interviewers shortly here. We've got the requisite uniform on, though.
You have.
We should get some shirts for you guys, too.
You're coming in fine, Robin.
Well, let's get started then. Good morning, Dorothy. I'm happy to welcome you here at the Art Festival. We're going to try something very experimental. We're going to try in the middle of the hubbub of the Art Festival to do some oral history with you this morning. I thought we might start if you would tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, we first came to Wickford in 1949 and have been here more or less ever since, actually. That is, I have. And at that time we had one child who was, I guess, going on 10, the other one was going on 7, and one who was going on 3 or 4, something like that, and one who arrived after we came to Wickford. It's just been a wonderful place to live. The kids love it, and I wouldn't have had any idea of going anywhere but back here after Fred died. I mean, I could exist in Providence, but I lived down here. And so that's the way I feel about it. But the town has changed so in the years in between. Of course, obviously the people have changed, but the whole character of Main Street is so different than it used to be. For instance, in the shop where Jack Renshaw, or the area where Jack Renshaw is with his architectural business, there was an A&P, believe it or not.
Right here on the main street.
Right here on the main street, and not only an A&P, but it was an A&P with a full-fledged meat market that was in the back corner of the shop. And one of the nice things about trading at that A&P was that they heated by one of these large open
registers in the floor. Mm-hmm.
And when you came to pay for your groceries, you could stand over that register on a good winter's day and be nice and warm while you paid for your groceries. But that particular area, for instance, has changed so unbelievably, because there was a house that was down there that has been completely torn down in the meantime. Mm-hmm. The parish house, of course, the reason that Fred came here was with the idea of building the parish house. And that was the thing that when people came up, he had been...
Perhaps we should say a word about Fred and his profession.
Well, he was a priest, and he was in an Episcopal church in Johnstown, New York, up in the Mohawk Valley. And we were very happy there. And when he got the first letter from Wickford saying, "Would you consider coming to Wickford?" he said no. In fact, he said no 3 times. And after the 4th time, he said to me, "Maybe the Holy Spirit is telling us something. Maybe we ought to do something about this." So then he agreed to talk with if they wanted to send some people up. He wasn't about to come down. If they wanted to send some people up and talk with him, he would consider talking with them. So that ended with actually 4 people coming up from here. I think only one of whom is still alive. And they came up and persuaded him that at least he should come down and look at the situation.
Who were those 4 that came up?
Well, they were Walter Rodman of the Rodman Mill, and Hiram Davis, who's the only one who's, I believe, is still alive. He's at a nursing home up in East Greenwich. He was the superintendent of the schools at that time. Mm-hmm. Roy Algren, who died actually within the last year, who taught at the high school, and Ed Pratt, who was the principal of the high school. And at least I think those were the ones. But at any rate, they came up, and as a result of their coming up, they persuaded us to at least come down and look. And I remember that the day that we came down, in those days the only way you could get down here was to come by train. We had to come to Boston, from Boston to Providence, and then get someone. Someone picked us up, and I think it was Walter Rodman picked us up. But we stopped to see Bishop Bennett, and then came on down here and spent the night down at Howard Briggs's, the insurance agent. And actually, he was one of the 4 who came up. I think he was one of the 4 who came up. At any rate, to make a long story as short as possible, we finally moved here in May, or the end of April, early May of that year, 1949.
What was the village like in 1949, as you remember? You talked a little bit about some of the buildings.
Yeah, well, it was very well, it was not as slow as it had been. I mean, the Navy was already part of the town, and it was a very active part of the town. But Brian's store, for instance, was about well, at most a quarter of the size that it is now. And
we give thanks for Ryan's Market.
Yes, we do. And Ryan's Market was as good then as it is now. When the present Ryan boy's father was behind the meat counter. His name was Ed Ryan, and they told a story of his being accosted by, I think you could say accosted, by Mrs. Henry Fonda at one time when he was stationed here. She came in and asked him for a steak, and he said, "Ma'am, we don't have this was during the meat shortages, we don't have a steak." And she said, "I want you to know that I am Mrs. Henry Fonda, and I want a steak." And he said, he is supposed to have said, "Ma'am, I don't care whether you're Mrs. Henry Fonda or the wife of the Pope."
The wife of the Pope?
But there is no way that I can give you a steak. So she left in a huff, and that was supposed to be it. But at any rate, he was the greatest guy. I mean, the fellows who are behind the meat counter now are good, but you had to have known Ed Ryan to have really known the shopkeepers in Wickford at the time. But of course, there was Stevie's drugstore. Mrs. Stevie still lives down on Pleasant Street, and there are some of the children in this part of the country. But the Stevie's drugstore was where this side of the bridge, and it stayed there. They ran into real trouble in the hurricane of 38. 38. No, not 38, no.
Before that?
We were in 38. The hurricane of 54.
54, yes.
And they really took an awful beating in that, and after that, things just fell apart for them, and the store changed hands, and Barbara went on to something else. And Harold Seavey died, actually. But there was a full-fledged cobbler next door to them, and about where Ryan's package store is now. And you could go in there and he would sew up your shoes, and
you could sure use him today.
Put the soles on in no time at all. Yes, we could. But he was just a lovely gentleman who lived there. And that store, they had a bad fire somewhere along the way, because I remember going down into the center of town with trying to hold on to the kids so as not to get into trouble when that place burned down. But the whole character of that part of Main Street has changed so considerably. But I think one of the people that I think of most when I think in terms of persons in town was that with a family of small children, the first person I wanted to know was, where is the doctor?
Exactly.
And I was told that the person to go to was Dr. Henry, who lived up in the big house that's next to the post office. And Dr. Henry had been the only doctor who was here during the war. Dr. Menzies was back by the time that we came to town, but he had been in service. And now Dr. Henry's daughter is one of the docents over at the old church, for instance. Good. And is over there. But Dr. Henry was the person that you went to when you wanted to get your kids taken care of.
So you went to Dr. Henry.
So we went to Dr. Henry. That's right. And then shortly thereafter, and in the house right on the corner by the church, you know, the pink house?
Sure.
Okay.
The pink house,
The
right.
pink house.
Mrs.
the
Whipple's
pink
house.
The pink house was owned by a Dr. Pelzer, Walter Pelzer, whom I have known since in Florida because he lives in the same town where my sister lives in Florida. So I've run into the Pelzers again as I went down there to visit her. His mother was also a doctor, and she lived in Jack Renshaw's house. And I remember Dr. Pelzer's wife particularly because the day we were moving in, her name was Millie, and she came to the fence and she said, Good morning, I'm Millie Pelzer. We're not members of your parish, so we can be friends. Which I thought was wonderful. And we were good friends. We were good friends up until the time Millie died. She died of cancer just about a couple of years ago. But I did know her in Florida regularly and saw a great deal of her. So there were, as I say, there were Frank Briggs, Walter Rodman, Frank Briggs. He lived down toward Saunderstown.
Wonderful, that's good.
And,
Morning, Jean.
And he was the insurance agent that now is part of Elmer Shippey's business because Elmer Shippey bought him out. And
I wanted to ask you a question relating to the Narragansett Church. I know that for a long time you've been one of the very strong arms of the effort to keep the church open and to show it to the public.
I wish I could get it painted right now.
Well, I think that's a good project. But can you tell us about what your first thoughts were on seeing it and how you feel today about it?
Well, I love it. And I mean, that was one reason that we buried Fred back there was the day that we came back from Denver. We were sitting around in the living room up at 10 Brown Street, and one of our daughters-in-law.
Your husband came back to be Bishop of Rhode Island.
Yeah, but he died in Denver, you see. That was the point. And so we came back after his death, and we were arranging what was going to happen. The dean of the cathedral and various other people were all there. And our daughter-in-law said, the dean wanted Fred interred down at the cemetery in the back of the cathedral.
Sure.
And our daughter-in-law said, no, he loved the old church. She said, that's where he's going to go. And it was, I mean, I wasn't even thinking at that stage of the game. And but the minute Claudia said that, that was the idea that we were going to do, and that's what it is. And
so it was always a special place for you both.
It's always been a special place, and it was a very special place for Bishop Higgins too. I wish Bishop Hunt would show more interest in it, but that's neither here nor there.
We're working on it.
We're working on it good. I don't know what you're thinking in terms of questions about the old church, Robin, because it's just such a great place, and the history of it is so fascinating. I mean,
it is, and really the question in my mind relates to your impressions when you're over there. When I'm at the old Narragansett Church, I kind of visualize the people of those years gone by worshiping there and how they must have been dressed. I wonder if you have that kind of thought.
Definitely. In fact, Queen Anne Sunday, I am one of the several people who dresses up for that service because I just think those of us who have the costumes, I don't suggest that anyone go out and make a costume or get one or anything like that, but if you've got one, I think wear it by all means, and we do. And you know, it's fascinating to be a docent over there because the people who come in either know nothing at all or know a great deal and ask some very intelligent questions, and it's a very interesting day that you put in.
Very satisfying.
Very satisfying, and it goes very quickly for all that you're putting in 5 hours or more, and it's just absolutely great. And it's it's one of my favorite places. But I might add that if you want my first impression of Wickford,
right?
My first impression, Robin, is terrible, and I'm not sure that you want it.
Oh, I think we should have it for the record.
Well,
let's back up and describe where you had been during your husband's career and before coming here, and what kind of life you had led as a young person.
Well, I was a preacher's kid.
Were you?
Yeah. And but after Fred and I were married, we just had 2 parishes before we came here. One was in Schoharie County in New York State, and or is it Delaware County? I'm not even sure at this stage of the game. A little town called Walton, and we enjoyed it very much. And then then we went to Johnstown, New York, which is just out of the Mohawk Valley, just up from Fonda, and just up from the Thruway, as a matter of fact.
So these were not large towns, not large communities.
Well, Johnstown was a fairly good-sized city, and I think it was because of Johnstown and because I was very happy there and loved it. My first impression of Wickford was so terrible because I really loved Johnstown and had a lot of friends there and was really not anxious to move. But as long as people had asked him several times to give some thinking or do some thinking about it, and Fred said, well, maybe the Holy Spirit is trying to tell us something, we did come down. But my first impression of the place was absolutely unbelievable because it was on the 23rd of January, and it was colder than heck, and none of the buildings that belonged to the church had any heat in them. The rectory hadn't been had any heat in it. The church hadn't been heated. The old Narragansett church certainly hadn't been heated. Still isn't.
Even St. Paul's.
Well, that particular day, they hadn't. I mean, I don't suppose anybody had even known that we were arriving. Oh, I'm sure that the committee did, but at least it seemed cold. And we walked up the Greenway, and every house on that side of the street over there had an outhouse.
Is that right?
And
they were all visible.
All visible. There was also one in the backyard of the church.
Yeah.
And
no kidding, really?
Oh yes. And I had been brought up in a city, and I had
not much experience with
with outhouses, believe me. And that turned me off completely. But there was one in back of every one of those houses over on that side of the street.
You could see them from the Greenway.
Oh yes, you could see them from. Well, there was no foliage on the trees.
Did you mention this to your husband at the time?
What I said to my husband was, when we got on the train to go back, what I said to myself was, just don't let Fred ask me what I think, because I'll burst into tears if I do, if he does. So he had the good sense not to ask me what I thought. But the outhouse in the back of the church stayed there until after the parish house was built, which was some little time that is getting it built. And then one day Fred said to me, or I said to Fred, when is that outhouse going to leave? Now, because he had said right along, once we get facilities in the parish house, we can get along without the one in the back of the church. So one day, George Cranston, the undertaker, David Cranston's father, arrived at the backyard, and I saw him moving around out there. Came up on the porch and he said, "Dorothy, is that the building you want to have moved?" And I said, "Yes, George." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, he said the Girl Scouts would like that building up at their day camp, which was up on the hill somewhere. And his wife was very much interested in Girl Scouts. And he said, I think that we could move that and get it out of your backyard. And the final remark that he made was, it's a very important building and it's a 3-holder. I had never even been in it. I didn't know what it was.
Thus progress came.
Yes, thus progress came.
You know, Dorothy, we were talking before about some of the personalities that you remember, the Ryans, the Rodmans, the Briggs, and you'd mentioned Mary Thomas. Now, we're very close to Mary Thomas's house, which is just behind you.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you'd tell us about Mary a little bit, and perhaps about some of the others who lived along the street here.
Well, Mary was an absolutely delightful person. She used to babysit for us. She used to babysit for other people in town. And I frequently said, as my children got older, that she knew more about what my children were doing than I knew, because she never forgot anything. And she and her daughter and her daughter's husband was the first one of the 3 who died, and then her daughter. She and her daughter finally ended up, after they left the house here, up at the Lafayette Nursing Home. And then Mary finally was in the retirement home that the black people have in Providence. I'm not even sure the name of it at this moment. But that's where she
survived until recently?
She survived, and she lived to be 103, I believe. And she certainly survived within the last 5 years. I'd have to look up records to find out for sure exactly when it was. And she was as keen the day she died as she was when she would babysit for my children.
Do you remember any particulars of her experiences with your children? Some of the...
No, they all loved her. That was
that was a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it was. It really was.
Was she a member of the parish?
Oh, yes. The interesting thing, though, was that she and her daughter, who would come to church very regularly, but they would always, and nothing that Fred could ever say would make them feel differently, but they always sat in the back corner
modestly
by themselves, as though and nothing that you could say would make them feel that they could move up further into the church or anything else. And but she used to, I remember there was a Navy family living upstairs in the house just across the street over there, a girl named Sally Baxter. And Sally was about the same age, I think, as my Pat. And Mary used to babysit for Sally, too. But everybody loved Mary. She just was the greatest person.
That's wonderful. You've seen a lot of architectural change in town, too. I've heard that during the Navy period, many of the houses were split up into apartments.
Well, the rectory at St. Paul's was up until the time just before the time of Harold Whitmarsh, just before we came here. The rectory had 3 apartments in it.
Is that so? Even the rectory? Yeah. So it was very much a Navy.
Oh, yes.
Navy housing area, I guess.
Well, it was definitely Navy housing. There was no question about it. And however, by the time we came, the house had been put back into more or less normal state, and the back part of the house had been rebuilt, actually, and was in very good shape. So it was not very much. But Walter Rodman, you mentioned him. Now, he and his wife were very active in fact, they have a daughter still living in town. And Walter Rodman was somehow related to the Ryans. I'm not quite sure what the connection was, but I know that Elizabeth Rodman and the Ryan boys are first cousins. But at any rate, Walter was the last of the people who ran the Rodman Mill up in Lafayette. And he and Mrs. Rodman lived in the rather large house that is up on the post road, quite close to the road, up on the left-hand side. And Fred used to have his garden up there, I remember that. We used to put in a garden up there. But he was a wonderful, wonderful person. And he was the senior warden when we first came here.
He was the senior warden.
Yeah.
That's why he was on the delegation that came down to New York State to see him.
Yeah.
Well, if you had to think for a moment about of all the changes that you've seen in this town, what would you regard as the biggest change?
Well, fortunately, there haven't been that many changes down this part of town, and that for which I will always be eternally grateful. I mean, Adelaide Lynch, for instance, lived in that house across the street over there, that corner house. And next to that was Mrs. Luth's house. She was a staunch member of the ECW and all the other things in town. And but all of those houses have remained exactly the same. And it's just so terrific to have them be the same. And as far as changes are concerned, thank the good Lord that they haven't come. The changes are down on Brown Street, definitely. I mean, the stores are very different. Wilson's store, at the time we came here, Paul Wilson's father was the junior warden, and the store was about, I don't know how to describe it as related to the present store, but it would have been about an eighth the size of the present store.
It was just in a very beginning stage.
It was just in its very beginning stage, and but it was a woman's and men's clothing store nonetheless. And but there it was, and his name was Edward Wilson, but he was always called Skitty. Skitty. Yes. And Paul was away at school at that time, I remember. He was at Holderness School up in New Hampshire. But his father was not in good health already at that time, though he got better again, and so forth. But I know.
I think probably the store that I miss most is a recent disappearance, that of the hardware store.
Exactly.
And that was a wonderful place.
Yeah, Barber's hardware store. Yeah.
I imagine in the days when the lumberyard was in the center of the village.
Well, of course, the hardware store never changed names. It was always Barber's hardware store.
It may have changed hands.
It changed hands because Mr. What was his name? Colvin, I think, was the one who sold out.
Everett
Colvin.
Yeah.
Everett Colvin, yeah. And but the Barbers lived right in back of you over here, and they were it was their store when we first came here. And now you have to go all the way up to Mancini's to get it there.
That's right, and that's a change.
Yeah, that is a change, definitely.
Well, we've seen the growth of a new kind of store, too, not a store so focused on the village resident, but a store that attracts people from outside.
Right. That's right.
Not only outside North Kingstown.
Yeah. I think that the reason for that is that there are more and more people driving into Wickford all the time. And so they go to, I mean, if they have children, they go to the teddy bear skins, or depending on what it is that they're looking for.
Some people do come here to shop.
Yeah,
It's more
they
important.
know.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they come here to shop as much as they come to just have a good time in town and end up shopping. That would have to be a...
In that sense, the style of life here has changed somewhat. It used to be a place that was more or less self-sufficient, I think.
Yeah, we used to have milk deliveries even.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And speaking of people, I remember Hunter White, who lived in your house very well. Hunter and his wife, who she of course always had a Confederate flag flying.
That's right. I understand that she is very loyal to the South.
Oh, very loyal to the South. There was always a Confederate flag flying out there.
Yeah.
And she took her loyalty to the South very seriously. Yeah.
Well, of course, Colonel White did a great deal to enliven interest in the village.
Well, he wrote the book, for instance.
He wrote the first book?
Little pamphlet book. Granted that it's not completely accurate always, but it's as accurate as most of those books are. I mean, Dr. Woodward's book on the Yankee plantation land is not completely accurate either.
Well, at least they got it all down on paper.
They got it down on paper.
Now we
right.
can decide what we think of it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Dorothy, it's been fascinating talking with you this morning. I thank you very much for coming by on your way over to open up the Narragansett Church for the Art Festival.
That's the next thing today.
That's a big project in itself, and I think that we would like, our organization would like to talk with you further. I think that it's very exciting to think that these transcripts and these videos will be available at the library for all the young people.
Yeah.
Which will be a wonderful resource to them.
Actually, I was thinking about it the other night after I think after you had called. I'm not sure that people like my Pat wouldn't be better people to do this sort of thing, because this old lady is beginning to lose her memory.
I think on the contrary.
And Pat remembers a lot of things that I find myself forgetting. I think I certainly cover a much longer space than she does, but I am absolutely convinced that she's much keener about some things than
maybe we could interview you both together. That might be both pleasant and
at any rate,
and interesting too.
But I would have to, for instance, be hunting for a name, and she would come up with a name almost immediately, which I certainly don't do.
You've done very well. I thank you very, very much.
Well, I enjoyed doing it.
Anything you'd like to add?
One thing that I had written down here that I'd forgotten about was that one of the real features in town, and you've got some posters there or some material there about it, was the Wickford Fair. That was the way the money was raised for the parish house, and that was the selling point that these people who came up to Johnstown had, was that we've raised this money to build the parish house, and now we've got to have somebody to build it for us. And
that's an appealing project.
yeah, well, Fred's point was he'd never built a building yet, so let's do that. And
so that's really the Belden Parish Hall in many ways.
well, yeah, and though the interesting person about it was that a man came into our purview at the time who was an architect who had done commercial buildings, was interested in the church, was interested in doing things like parish houses that people could afford. His name was Ben Faunce, and he was from New Jersey. When he came to town, as he did in order to supervise the project. He was also supervising the parish house down in the Church of the Ascension in Wakefield. And he always stayed with us. My children loved him. In fact, I think he gave one of them I think it was Pat, he brought her a bicycle once he came to town. But
Quite a house gift.
Yeah, he was just he was a lovely person, and he loved the kids, and they loved him. And but the money for the village, for the parish house, had been largely raised. Granted that a lot more had to be raised, but a lot of, the fund was there to get started from the village fair.
The village fair was an annual thing.
It was an annual
10,
thing.
15 years.
You could almost say it was the forerunner for the art festival. Because while it didn't go all over town like this, the area over on the corner of Beach Street, where there's a house, that house belonged to Mary Metcalf, who was the head of the Alder Guild at St. Paul's at the time. And the whole lot, which is now fenced in, and where you see boats
Yes.
up,
Boats parked up in there.
during the winter, that area was all the area where the village fair was held.
I see.
And every spring, the various members of the vestry would go up to Boston and buy gifts for. They never had any games that were games of chance. They were always
Games of skill.
And so that, you'd throw a hoop over something, or you would do something. And we had a full dress merry-go-round.
No kidding.
Yeah. And the merry-go-round lasted up until it got to the place where the men got to be too weak to put it up every year. But it was we had a full dress merry-go-round that was stored at a barn up in Lafayette. And that merry-go-round was the real thing for the kids, believe me.
That was wonderful.
And it was at the back of that lot, and the rest of the fair was around. And the Village Fair News, which is that paper that you have over there, was printed every year. Mrs. Dawson, Addie Lynch's mother, was the person who spearheaded and really got that thing going, as far as the whole editorial part of it was her doing. And it's
a nice record of the time.
It is.
Lots of history in it too.
There is. And I think Peter has copies of it up in the loft of the church.
Peter Spencer, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting point that you make about it being kind of the predecessor of the art festival in many ways.
Yeah, it was. And then for 1 year or so after, about when Miss Metcalf died first, and Addie, we're talking about you. Well, anyway, for 1 year we put it over in the Greenway. It didn't work at all.
Oh, I don't know.
Come over and say hello, Addie.
I'm just talking about your mother in the Village Fair News.
Yeah, right.
Sit down and talk to her.
Yeah, sit down and talk to Dorothy for a second.
Don't worry about notes or anything else, because I'm certainly not. No, I was just talking about what the Village Fair and how much the village.
That's a microphone.
you're being mic'd.
Recorded. There you go. Just sit back.
Your mother ran
Sit down.
your mother did the Village Fair News for how many years? Would you know offhand?
An awfully long time.
I know an awfully long
don't
time.
know.
I know.
I have copies of all of them. I could look it up. But
Yeah. Well, I think Peter has copies of them in the church too. I had copies for a long time, but I finally gave mine up, and I think mine are the ones that are up in the up over the in back of the church and at the addition there. They know, but it's.
We were talking about some of the houses on the main street here, and remembering. Dorothy was remembering when You were living across the corner there. Over there.
Oh, yeah. We bought that house.
You and Bob bought that house,
yeah.
didn't you?
40
And of
years
course,
ago.
Addie's mother lived in the yellow house right across from the church, the big brick house that's right on the sidewalk.
And I still own it.
Yes, she still owns it.
I have 6 rentals I have to take care of.
Oh my, oh my. Well, it keeps you busy.
It sure does. That and my blind, crippled husband.
That's right. How's Bob doing today? So.
Hanging in there.
What? I know that your mother died 1 year.
1970.
I knew it was a year of General Convention because we were on our way back from General Convention when we got the word that she had died, and we know.
My father died in 1959.
Yeah, I remember that. And it was.
What sort of, I'm sorry to ask such a basic question, Addie, but you grew up here in town and you probably remember vividly some of the early experiences.
I've only been here 73 years.
73 years, that's a good piece of time. Over 73 years you've seen a lot of change, a lot of things that haven't changed. When Dorothy and I were talking, we remarked that some things have changed, but a lot hasn't changed.
The village itself hasn't changed.
That's what I said.
Brown Street,
That's what
yes,
I said.
but this part
this
stays
part,
the same.
Yeah, and that I think is the wonderful thing. I was mentioning the fact that Mrs. Luth lived over there and you lived here,
Yes.
and the various other.
You talked about Mary Thomas here.
Yeah.
Right hand.
And when we first came here, the house that's on the corner of the Greenway was known by the church, and I think it'd been given as part of when the Greenway was.
A long time. It was the annex of the Wickford house.
Yeah.
That house.
They know.
It was
But
owned by them.
We haven't talked about the Wickford house, but we have up on our historic board the sign for Wickford House.
Mother Prentice's.
Mother Prentice's
Yeah.
Wickford House.
Well, you can. I mean, Mother Prentice was gone before we came here, but you must remember Mother Prentice. They know.
Yep.
Mr. Parker, Clarence Parker, used to, when we first came here, he would have things like the Republican town dinner or the Democratic town dinner or whatever.
It was a political place.
It was a political place.
What kind of dinners did they offer, I wonder, there?
Oh, I think very good meals.
Yeah, very good meals.
Very good
Seafood type
meals.
things?
Yeah.
Some, but they had all kinds of
Steaks?
They know.
steaks.
But I
chicken.
remember that Mr. Parker had a huge walk-in refrigerator out and back. Certainly still there when we came here. And of course his widow still lives over near Addie.
Right next to me. She
to
bought my
Addie.
uncle's house.
And one of his daughters is one of the cashiers at Ryan's.
And she lives with her mother.
Yeah.
The other is one's in Wakefield, one's up in Poplar Point, and her son's in Florida.
Yeah.
Were you actually born here in the village, Addie?
No. My mother and father, unfortunately, were down in Pennsylvania when I was born.
Oh, is that right?
But then we came
That's
back.
a closely guarded secret. I
Right.
know.
Then we came back, and
Settled in here.
my mother was born here.
I see.
My father was born in England.
What was your father's line of work?
He was in the electrical business.
Addie had an uncle. Wait a minute, not Addie. Yes, it would have been your uncle, Henry Dawson, wasn't it?
No, Henry Dawson was my father. John Dawson was my
Yeah,
uncle.
I know.
And
Wait a
he
minute,
started
John
the Art
Daw-
Association.
Yeah, he was the one who started the Art Association here in town, and he was his job was a restorer for the paintings at Rutgers University, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
And
My father
have-
and mother were one of the starters of the Main Street Association.
yeah,
And they were also one of the people that started the Coke and Cussack Association. They were very civic-minded.
yeah.
Try and follow in their footsteps. Keep that tradition going.
Right.
But I don't happen to have, because I think I gave it to Pat. My daughter has a painting that was done by Addie's uncle that was one of, I don't know whether she got it once at or whether we picked it up once at an art festival, or whether it could have been one your mother gave me. I can't remember, Addie. I know.
I think I have something with Lawson's name on it right here. I'll bring it over.
John Dawson would have been. Yeah, that's his style. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh yeah.
That's
Main Street.
Yeah, that's definitely it.
That's courtesy of the Daniels.
Charles and
Charles and Lyle.
Yeah, and,
And I think my Pat has one of those too. I've got to check with her about it, but I think that I'm pretty sure that she owns one of those right now.
Well, they predicted rain for this weekend, but they were wrong, weren't they? Then they changed their mind.
This is now. We got the rain the day before, a
I know.
day early, which was great. I know.
Well, I gotta go.
You have to run off, huh?
Yeah. Well, I don't leave my husband too long.
Well, it's nice of you to drop in and chat with us for a moment.
See ya.
And we'll hope to chat with you some more.
All right. Fine.
Okay, thanks, Addie.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Addie. Thanks for coming by.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Well, that was nice. Well, Dorothy, I think we've
just about done it for now.
It's just
I
about
can't
10
think.
o'clock, so you
Yeah.
have lots of time to relax
I've got time to get over
before
and
your
get things started over there.
schedule begins.
Yeah. Okay,
Thank
good.
you so much. I think
Well-
we should have had Pat here. I
Well-
thought of it, but I forgot about it and thought of it again and didn't do it.
Well, I didn't think about it at first, but the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I wish that I had suggested that she do it.
Let's plan on another talk and we can do it in a quieter place and maybe in
That
your
would be-
parlor
That would be fine, yeah.
or my parlor.
Yeah, whatever. Whatever.
Thank you very much again.
Okay, fine.
Let me unhook you here.
And in the Crossman.
Are we on? Okay, let me just give a couple of introductory words here. For the record, my name is Richard Carpenter, and I'm interviewing Henry Tillinghast on behalf of the Historic Wickford Oral History Project for 1990. Henry, my understanding is that I've always supposed that you're a lifelong resident of North Kingstown. Is that correct?
Born and brought up here.
Born and brought up. Where did you first live when you lived here, Henry?
Up at Wickford Junction.
Wickford Junction, is that where the old railroad station was?
That's where the old railroad station was. And there was several houses in there, and they've torn them all down. There used to be an old hotel there.
You mean a hotel that served the junction?
Yeah, it served the junction.
Where would that have been in relationship, say, to the Masonic Lodge?
When you went under the underpass, it would have been the first building on the right-hand side.
When you first remember that underpass up there, was it as wide as it is today, or was it widened as traffic grew heavier?
No, when they did away with the going over the tracks, that was the original. They never changed. That's never been widened or changed since they put it in.
Oh, I see. So in other words, when your first memory then is the railroad tracks up there.
Oh yeah, I can remember.
Was a bridge over.
When you went over the railroad tracks instead of under them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. I never knew that. What is your earliest recollection of Wickford? Do you have any particular memories of Wickford?
Well, I can remember when there used to be an iron bridge over here as you went around Brown Street before they put the cement bridge in.
Oh, on Brown Street?
Yeah, the one near the
Near the
Guild Hall.
Okay. Okay, that's the Hussey, yeah, okay.
Yeah, the Hussey Bridge.
Right.
They named it the Hussey Bridge when they made the cement bridge.
Who was Hussey? I've always wondered that.
Now, I don't know whether there used to be when I went to school at the Wickford Grammar School, that used to be the grammar school and the high school. There was a Hussey that was superintendent of schools. So I don't know whether they named the bridge after him or whether it was somebody else. But
Was Wickford Elementary School pretty much the only elementary school in town, or were there others when you were going to school?
There was one out at Quonset, over on Quonset Road. There was another one up in Slocum, as you used to go into the Brow Farm.
Okay.
Right there on the corner, there used to be an elementary school there. Then there was the one out in Allenton.
In Allenton. Now, my
And then
understanding...
there was another one at one time down in Saunderstown.
Okay. My understanding is that even up to, say, 25 years ago, not only Wickford, but the other villages, so-called, had a very distinct identity that they were sort of proud of.
Oh yes, boy, when you talked about Wickford, you had to say whether it was Wickford or Belleville, Allenton, and you'd start telling somebody about going out to Allenton or going to Belleville, and you'd say, now right after you go by Collation Corner, you're going to be in Belleville, and 20 feet down the road you're going to be in Allenton, and they'd look at you and think you were crazy.
What was Wickford's principal industry or occupation when you were growing up, Henry? What did they primarily do here?
It was mostly fishing and these fellows going out dragging, and the Lewis brothers, they used to go out and drag for some kind of fish. That used to be quite a business. And then of course we had back then, all of the Smiths, every one of the Smith boys were captains on different boats, and geez, a lot of the young fellas in town were part of the crew on the boats. And
Did you ever do any of that, Henry?
No, I never got into that. I didn't care much for the water. I'd rather be on land.
Was the General running when you were a boy?
Yeah, the General was running. Used to come over here where the Wickford shipyard is.
Didn't tie up at the town pier, tied up across the way?
Used to tie up across the pier there.
Now I've also heard tell at that time that was also like a railroad terminal down there.
Yeah, I can remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, the train used to come off the track at Wickford Junction and come down, and the train used to go right over there, and people get off the train and get on the boat and go to Newport.
Now, did the General's run start here, or was this just an intermediate start?
Well, it ran from here to Newport.
Oh, I see.
It traveled back and forth. I don't know how many trips a day it would make, but people from New York, Boston, people coming in to go to Newport, they'd come in on the train, and as I say, the train would unhook a car, and it would come down here, and people transfer and get on the boat.
Did other steamers stop here at Wickford as well, or was that the only one?
No, that was the only one that, as I remember, that stopped for transportation or anything.
Okay, so there wasn't a run, say, that would go from here to Providence to any place like that?
No, not that I know of. No.
Okay. the train station, Wickford itself had a train station at one point, didn't it?
Right there, right where Lloyd Lucas's lumber yard is, across the street, there used to be a train station there, and where the building that the Wickford lumber is in, that used to be a two-story building there. They cut the top off, and the house that sits between the Catholic Church and where the Wickford lumber is, that used to be the top of that building. And
Waste
then,
not, want not.
And then the building that's in back of the Wickford lumber, that used to be the train station. That was over across the street.
Okay.
And they moved that when Lloyd Lucas bought that property. He bought the train station and moved it over there, and he used it for storage for his lumber.
Did the Seaview Railroad connect there as well?
Yes, Seaview used to go. Seaview was just, let's see, it would be east of that, where it went over the trestle there.
Yeah, right.
Right there. Yeah.
Where Dr. Knapp's office is now?
Yeah, right through there.
But could you, for instance, go, say, connect between the train and the Seaview at any point?
Oh yeah, you could. Right over here at what the hell's the road that goes up by the radio
Prospect
station?
Street?
Prospect. Right there was another station there, and when the Seaview Railroad used to come along, they used to go right across the main line for the train. They crossed right there.
When you were a young person, Henry, if you were going to go to Providence, would you go on the Seaview or would you take the train? Which was the most reliable, most common?
Well, the most common was the train, because the railroad, the Seaview stopped. Geez, the Seaview Railroad went out of business. I was about 5 or 6 years old when they went out of business.
Well, that sort of surprised me. I sort of thought they ran they ran for a good long time after into the 30s, but I guess not.
No, they went out of business. They went out of business in long before 1925.
Oh, I didn't realize that. If you had to think back over your lifetime, what would you pick out probably as the event having the biggest impact, not only on Wickford, but on North Kingstown itself?
I would say some of the biggest changes that changed the outlook for Wickford was when Colonel Rodman gave up the reins of being, he was considered the boss of the town. At that time, when you had a financial town meeting was held in the during the day, and there wouldn't be, hell, if there was 20 people at the financial town meeting, that was a big financial town meeting. But you didn't, when you went to that meeting, although you were a taxpayer, you didn't shoot your mouth off like we do now.
Yeah.
Old Colonel Rodman, he was the boss. And the Republican Town Committee would meet probably a month or two before they had financial town meeting, and they decided what the budget was going to be. And when they had financial town meeting, the colonel would say the highway department is going to get so much money. The school department's going to get so much money. the town hall so much money. And that was it. A department head couldn't get up and say, oh, I can't run the highway department with that amount of money. That's all the money you're going to get. And that was it. And I remember a couple of times, Hy Davis, he was superintendent of schools. And he'd tell the colonel, he'd get a little upset. And he'd say, I can't run the school department on that amount of money. That's all the money you're going to get.
How long did Colonel Rodman actually maintain control of the Republican Party here?
He controlled the party. He was very much in control up until about 36. He started to relinquish his control. And then George Cranston and Joe Green, they started to take over. And then the public began to realize we got to have some input in what's going on in this town. So that's when, from my first appearance at Financial Town Meeting was in 1936. And that's when we started, the public started to have input. And then, as I say, the public more or less decided what the budget was going to be instead of one man saying this or that. That's when the public began to have input and say what we were going to do and what we weren't going to do.
But the Republican Party really didn't give up a stranglehold on town politics for another 20 years or 30 years.
They held, the Republicans held on to pretty much up until about 1955, 1957. Then it started to fall apart. That's when we had a lot of new people moving in, and they started to get into politics, and they had their ideas, and the natives would have their ideas, and that's when we'd have these conflicts at Financial Town Meeting. One would try to outdo the other one.
I can remember the first town meeting I went to was 1966, and it was, I'd come from the Midwest, it was sort of like street theater in many, in many respects.
Well, I remember back when I started going to Financial Town meetings in 37. And people would call up and say, Henry, how long is town meeting going to last? And I'd say, well, probably a couple of nights. And then as we'd go on, it would get longer. And the longest one we ever had lasted about a week.
I remember that one very clearly.
And people would call up and say, well, how long is this one going to last? Oh, this is going to last a week. Now, Phil Cattell, during his administration, Phil would say, hey, old man, Jesus, don't keep us too long. But
who were some of the more interesting personalities that appeared at, I don't mean necessarily from the point of view of the town council or the school committee, but in terms of the...
Tillinghast. How are you?
Well, so to be kicking.
Well, good.
Who were some of the more colorful personalities that appeared on the floor of the town financial meeting besides yourself?
Well, some of my biggest critics were people like Ben Sturgis and his wife. And I remember back in about 56, the police department was getting 83 cents an hour. Brett Moon come to me, and Brett says, Henry, he says, hey, can you try to get us $1 an hour? And I says, Jesus, I don't know, Brett. He says, you're paying laborers $1 an hour. And he says, we're getting 83 cents. So I knew that he had been, at that time we had a police commission. And he'd been to the police commission, and the police commission turned him right down, said, no, can't give you any more money. So then he went to the council, and the council said, no, the police commission doesn't recommend it. So they turned it down. So then they brought it up at financial town meeting. And that year, out where the mall, a shopping mall is, where Kingston Plaza is,
Right.
that used to be a hell of a big hill. And I was leveling that land off. And Brett would come out and trying to keep asking me, Jesus, will you try to get that on the floor? Well, George Cranston was more or less the boss at that time. So a couple of times George see him out there talking to me, and George would call me up. Now George and I were the best of friends, but everybody thought George and I were enemies. And George stopped the day of financial town meeting. He says, Henry, Jesus, don't bring that up, will you? He says, we can't give it to him. So I says, George, they're paying $1 a pound for butter just same as you and I are. So I brought it up, and we argued that point for 2 hours. And it came to a vote. So George was moderator. So George said, all those in favor of the raise, say aye. Those opposed, no. Well, George says, the motion is defeated. I said, George, it isn't defeated. I want another vote. So we took 3 votes. And every time he said it was defeated. So I got mad and I says, George, I want a paper ballot. Okay. He says, you're just prolonging the meeting. I want to count the ballots. He says, I will name who the 3 are that's going to count them. I said I want to count the ballots. So he says, all right, you'll be one of them. So they passed them out. They counted them. There was 197 for the raise, 97 opposed. So I couldn't let that one get by, so I jumped up and I says, George, I want you to go and have your ears examined tomorrow and I'll pay for it. So Mrs. Sturgis, she jumped up and she was so damn mad, she says, I got a good notion to slap you right across the mouth. I come down off the bleachers and I says, slap me. Glasses or no glasses, I says, I'll mop this floor up with you. So they took off. Ben got her out of the meeting. And it went through. And that, from then on, financial town meetings got worse and worse. Everybody began then to realize, geez, if you fight hard enough, you can get it, or you can make them do something.
The town government here, what was the difference? Did the town manager form of government make any significant change in the boss system or not?
I think, I often wonder whether we gained or lost out of that deal. I was always under the impression that the council always had their finger on the town manager, and I could never understand how a new man coming into town, didn't live here, wasn't a resident of the state of Rhode Island, and he could come in here and in a week he'd decide who was going to have this job and who was going to have that job.
The town clerk, before the advent of the town manager system, had a great deal more authority then than he did now.
Oh yeah, the town, when John P.B. Pierce was town clerk and Mary Duffy deputy, we had a pretty good town. They knew everybody in town. And when there was an appointment being made or somebody being considered for a committee or anything,
This way as a diamond.
the council would more or less look up to those two to recommend somebody for some position. And I think it was fairer than it is today.
If I had, as a taxpayer, for instance, had a problem in the pre-town manager days, you know, my street light's out, my street needs to be paved, I got a pothole, who would I call?
Well, if you called the town manager, when they first come here, you'd go down and complain, and then they'd say to you, well, we'll have to bring that up at a council meeting. That'll be on the agenda. And that was one of the reasons why I used to get in a lot of trouble. I'd say, what the hell are we paying the town manager for? And he can't give you an answer. He tells you, well, we got to put this on the agenda, or it'll come up at a council meeting. And you couldn't get a good answer out of it. It was always, well, we go to the council. And I used to raise hell with the council and ask them, what the hell do we have a town manager for? You people have more work now than you had before we had the town manager. And they used to laugh at me.
What about the town clerk now? Was that more efficient, or appeared to be more efficient?
I think it was more efficient in those days. The town clerk today, I don't think, has the respect that they had in the older days.
That's true.
The older days, the town clerk, boy, could tell you something, and by God, you could go to the bank with what they told you. And there was very seldom was there a dispute between the council and the town clerk. When John P.B. and Mary Duffy gave a decision, by God, it was as good as some of the law opinions that they get today.
Was the town clerk in those days an elected official, or was he appointed by the council?
The town clerk used to be elected.
Oh, he was. So he had his own contingent. He had his own constituency.
Yeah, when it first started out. Yeah.
And today, we're talking about going to a mayor form of government, which almost seems like going back, really just calling the town clerk a different name.
That's about what it amounts to. That's just about what it amounts to.
What, if anything, do you recall about the impact of Quonset Point on the town?
Well, that's where I think when Quonset was here, the town relied too much on Quonset Point, and we didn't have the input then to demand more out of them than what they were willing to give us. And Quonset pulled a lot of fast stuff on us. You know, we got stuck when Quonset pulled out of here.
I know it.
With that school over there on Camp Avenue. Mm-hmm. And that was nothing but Froberg, being superintendent of schools, didn't follow through when Quonset pulled out to request that the government give us. We owed $420,000 on that building at that time. Mm-hmm. And he failed to ask our senators or representatives to put a bill through. But Tillinghast and his big mouth got a hold of Pell, and Pell came here, and we had a hearing, and I was arguing for him to put a bill in to get us $420,000 because we built that addition over there. The original they gave us.
Yeah.
They paid for. But when we put the addition on, we had to pay for it. But it wasn't our kids that were being educated there. It was Navy personnel. And I kept arguing, why should we, as taxpayers, have to pick up Navy personnel? Let them pay for it.
Right. Right.
And so the Navy gave us some money towards it, but then we had to float a bond for the rest of it.
I remember that.
And then when they pulled out, and Pell was here, and we argued the point. He says, I'll get back to you in a week. About a week later, he called me up and he says, Mr. Tillinghast, he says, the statute of limitations ran out on that, so I can't introduce a bill.
Oh.
He says, if Froberg had introduced or asked for a bill to be introduced in Congress, we could have got that money to pay it off. But it wasn't, so we got stuck with it.
When they were building Quonset, did you do any work over there?
I was the first little outfit to go in there. When they started to build, they called it Seaplane Hangar Number 1. That's where Electric Boat is, Number 1.
Yeah.
I went in there with Raymond Concrete, Pile of New York, and Merritt Chapman and Scott. I went in there when they were driving the piles. I had a water wagon, and I used to, every day used to have to bring water down for them, for the pile drivers, to keep the pile drivers going. And then as things progressed there, I got work there. I bid the first 50,000 yards of gravel that went into Quonset Point. I beat Gamino. I beat everybody. I beat them by a half a cent.
But on 50,000 yards, that's significant.
As I did a lot of work there, and of course, one reason why I got in there, I worked with Merritt Chapman and Scott on the Jamestown Bridge. I hauled all of the cement for the deck when they put the cement deck on.
Right.
That used to come in by train. We used to unload it over in front of the town hall, and I used to take it down. They had a dock down at the end of Champlain Road.
Okay.
And used to be an old quarry there, and we used to haul the cement down there, and it's what they call tailboard delivery. We just took it there, and it was up to them to unload it onto the barges, and then we'd come back and load up and haul back down there.
How many trucks were you running at that time?
At that time I had 2 trucks of my own. I was just in the trucking business. And then you've heard of Dixon used to run a hay and grain
Yeah, I think
store
so.
right where the Hospital Trust Bank is.
Okay.
Right in there. And then they moved out of there and went over where the old train station was. And Harry Dixon had a tractor and trailer. And they need cement down there so fast that every other day I'd hire his trailer and load it, and we'd take it down there and leave it. And they'd unload that during the day while we were coming in with the dump trucks. And
Would it come in, and what would it come in? Bag cement?
It used to come in cloth bags.
Not paper.
Yeah, no, not paper then, it was cloth bags.
Where did the fill come from? I know that they filled in so much over there around Quonset Point to put in the airstrip. Where did that come from? Was that all local, or?
You know where the Wickford Outdoor Theater used to be?
Yes.
Right up there on the post road?
Right.
Well, when I started in business, the Spinks owned that property. And the Rhode Island State Board of Public Roads at that time, which is DOT transportation now,
Right.
they used to haul gravel out of there, and I used to haul gravel. And I had I had an option on that bank, so I hauled out of there. Well, the first 50,000 yards of gravel, we took about half of it out of there, and then over on Old Baptist Road, where the library is,
Right.
right in back of that, I opened up a gravel bank in there, and we hauled the rest of it out of there. And then, after that, then they were beginning to let them out in 250,000 yard batches at a time. And then Talon Construction came in. They got the first 250,000 yard bid, and they started up there on Lafayette Road where McKay is.
All right.
All in through there and all around the Belleville Pond. They hauled out of there millions of yards.
So that really significantly changed a good part of the topography of the town. Just
when they went into Quonset and started to grade, boy, they changed grades over there to beat hell.
Oh, I bet. I bet.
Right after they had started, you know, they decided that they'd made a mistake. Out where the sewer plant is,
Right.
and where the heating plant is, that is just about the original grade of Quonset Point, right there. And as I say, right after they really got going, and well, they were so far ahead, it advanced there that it was too late to change grades. Then they were beginning to say, geez, we should have raised it another 4 feet.
Yeah.
But where at the ends of the runway, that was all filled in out through there.
What effect did the 38 hurricane have in this immediate area? Do you recall that?
Geez, Christ, about in the middle, if you can picture Quonset now,
Yeah.
and picture the middle of that,
Yeah.
it looked like a big saucer.
Uh-huh.
Out on the south side of Quonset, that was along there where the submarine place is. That was about anywhere from 10 to 15 feet above sea level. Mm-hmm. And then as you came back in, then it more or less formed like a big saucer. And when the 38 hurricane hit, it swept everything right down into the middle.
Oh, wow.
And it looked like just like a big dump in there.
Huh. Wow.
And there was only 2 or 3 places that were standing, but they were so damn badly damaged that they tore them down.
That was a pretty significant summer colony out there prior to the 38 hurricane, wasn't it?
Before this hurricane, that was a beautiful summer resort over there. Yeah.
Do you recall what the effect was right here where we're sitting and in this general area?
Where we're sitting right now used to be some of the most beautiful trees you ever looked at. Christ, it cleaned about all of the big trees down through here.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, if you get down here to the town dock and look on this side of the dock, you can still see some of the stumps that are still there. They were stumps that came out of here.
Oh, wow.
When they took the stumps out after they cut the trees down and everything.
Now, I've heard talk that actually the hurricane was the initial impetus for the town water system.
That's right. That's what started the North Kingstown water system.
How did people exist? I mean, this must have been all wells before that.
Yeah, there was wells, and right after the hurricane, we used to have the people in Wickford here. They used to have the fire truck went around daily giving them water. Where they didn't have a well or their well was polluted, the fire truck went around every day and gave them water.
So what did you say? You'd put your bucket out on the front step?
You could go out. The people up where where that new medical building is up on Phillip Street.
Right.
On this side of it,
Yeah.
used to be a town well right there. And of course, a lot of the people over in that area went up there and got the water. And then a lot of them used the water. They got this well down here at the park.
Right.
They got in there just as quick as they could, and they pumped that out and chlorined it and everything. And they could use that for washing dishes and stuff, but they'd tell them not to drink it. The fire truck would come around and give them water.
Have there been any real changes here in the village that you can remember? Or is it pretty much as it was?
Wickford itself hasn't changed that much. Not the village has stayed pretty much the same, with the exceptions of where Wilson is. Of course, that was where Henry Gerard had his lumber yard and coal yard and everything. But that's about the biggest change in immediate Wickford. Everything else is pretty much the same. Because right here there used to be a big old house.
Oh, really?
And that went to hell, and they along and about, well, right after the 38 hurricane, they cleaned that up. It used to be a beautiful old place sit there, and the Barbers owned it. They used to own the Barber Lumber Company.
Right. Was that the only house on this corner, or was there a series of them?
No, there was just that big house right here on that, right here at this corner.
And then there was a house, I understand, on where the addition is, on my office building.
Yeah, there was
or one, or maybe even more than one.
Yeah, there was quite a lot in there. But
and were there houses? I sort of have a sense that not only were these houses on the main street, there were a lot of houses tucked in behind that have long since gone, houses and buildings.
Oh yeah, there's been a lot of, down on the Platte, that got hit pretty hard. And a lot of the older buildings, they were knocked to hell, and they just tore them down, cleaned them up.
The one other thing that I've always sort of been interested in is the spread of the water system. It came to Wickford. Where did it go then? I understand it was very controversial as to where it was going to go after it started here.
When they first put it in, they sold us the idea. It was just for Wickford. Came down the post road and serviced everything in Wickford. Well, then, back then the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, got to fighting. Somebody wanted water out here, and somebody wanted water out there. So every once in a while they'd get a little extra money, and they decide to put another line in somewhere. But it was quite a while before they ever ran it up through Lafayette. And of course, the reason that a lot of the people were against that was they always said, well, you run it up through there, that's for the Rodmans. But they weren't that bad. They weren't the ones that were insisting upon it. It was the parties that were playing politics and would say, oh, just the Rodmans want that. But it wasn't the Rodmans. It was the people that lived on 10 Rod Road that wanted water.
Was there ever a decision made? Must have been a decision made at some point that we are going to really expand this water system. And was that decision ever made, or did it just sort of grow an inch at a time, sort of?
It just grew inch at a time. At that time, we had a water commission, and the water commission pretty much decided where the next extension was going to be, and the council paid pretty close attention to what they suggested.
How was the town electrified? Now, I've heard tales that at the Union Mill there were big batteries that serves some electricity here in town. Are you familiar with that?
I never ever heard of that. No,
Did they ever generate electricity separately here?
no, not that I know of.
It always came down
Always
from Providence.
came down from Providence, yeah.
How about telephone?
Telephones were always available.
Because I can remember when I started going out with my wife, I think her phone number was something like 36, which a boy from the city couldn't understand.
Oh yeah, of course back then you had a telephone and you probably had 3 or 4 people on the line, and you'd have such a number as 567 J1 or J2 or something, and people would say, what the hell kind of a number is that? And you'd pick up your phone and you'd never know who, unless you knew who some of the people were that were on the line, you'd never know who was listening to your telephone conversation. You'd go down the street and you'd be talking to somebody. If you knew somebody that worked in the telephone office, they could tell you
who else was on your line,
who you were talking to, and what you were talking about.
It must have been a pretty different world at that point than it is now. A much slower place.
Well, it was slow. Everybody, I don't know, people back then didn't seem to be in the rush they're in today. And it, as I say, the old colonel, he was a tough old cookie. But it was a good thing because he was the boss. Mm-hmm. And everybody didn't decide, we're going to have this, we're going to have that. And of course back then, the president of the council, who was Bill Brown, he was highway commissioner as well as president of the council. John Smith, he was a senator, and he was on the council. So that
dual office holding.
You had dual office holders then, and there was no conflict of interest in those days.
Yeah. Was that pretty symbolic, the idea that one man more or less being in control? Was that pretty much the case through most of the small towns in this area? Back
then it was. Back then about every town had a boss, but, and then of course the colonel, he was a member of the public utilities. So he was a pretty goddamn powerful man.
Yeah, he sounds it. He sounds. I've never heard anything to contradict that opinion. That's for sure.
And he was a pretty square shooter. Of course, he was a Republican, and he abided by what the Republicans wanted. If there was a question as to whether the Republicans win or you win, he'd give it to the Republicans, yeah, which was no more than right.
Yeah.
He was a pretty good man for the town.
Sounds like a good man for his times too.
In his times he was. Yes, he was hard to beat.
Yeah.
I remember in '71. It was when we were getting ready to put the addition on the school at Camp Avenue.
Right.
And they wanted to float a bond. And of course, it came up at a council meeting. We were arguing about it. At that time, Phil Cattell was president. Mm-hmm. So we were arguing. We were pretty hot. Mm-hmm. So I said, Phil, Quonset Point isn't here to stay. He looked down at me. He used to call me old man. He says, old man, that's going to be here when you're dead and gone. So, geez, all of a sudden, 1972, Quonset Point the rumor is it's going to close.
Yeah.
So Phil called me up one night and he says, how the hell did you know that? I didn't know it. Chafee was, Senator Chafee was...
governor at the time.
No, he was Secretary of the Navy.
Right, Secretary of the Navy.
He says, by God, he says, Chafee couldn't tell us whether it was going to close, and he was Secretary. He said, how the hell did you ever find out?
It's a good guess.
I said, I just took a guess at it.
Yeah.
But during And you know, during Phil's administration, we had a pretty damn good run town.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Phil Cattell was, I'd put Phil Cattell in the same class with Bill Brown. Phil Cattell and I, we had our problems, but Phil Cattell was a man.
Yeah.
We'd get in a fight, and people would say, Jesus, boy, I'm afraid they're going to get in a fist fight. Meeting be over, we'd go home, and if my telephone rang at 7 o'clock Tuesday night, I knew who it was.
Yeah.
It was Phil. He'd call up and he'd say, hey, old man, how you feeling? I'd say, all right. Hey, Jesus, you had a good idea last night, but I couldn't go along with it because people would say, oh, he gave in to Tillinghast. But he says, now keep quiet. He says, we'll be talking about that a little later on.
Yep.
And he'd say, I'm going to give that a lot of thought. Geez, you go to a council meeting probably 2 or 3 months later and it'd be on the agenda.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep your mouth shut. And they'd discuss it, and all of a sudden somebody'd say, I make a motion, we pass that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that work a couple of times.
But as I say, Phil was, in my book, I don't think we ever had anybody that was any fairer. Now, I used to do a lot of the town work. I put in, I roughed in probably a third of the town roads.
Oh, I never knew that.
Christ, down in Hamilton Flat, every damn road in there, I either roughed it out or cut it out. The road going to Gilbert Stewart House,
Oh, yeah, right.
that used to be just nothing but a cart path.
Uh-huh.
I went in there and widened that out. Of course, I had a bulldozer and a shovel at that time. All the town had then was, they used to hire trucks. An individual would own a truck and they'd work for the highway department.
Last time I think I ever did that I ever remember was Westerly, when they put in their sewer line up
And
along
they used
Route 1.
to haul the gravel for the roads, and as I say, I'd go in and cut them out. And then I used to do the school work until during Hefton Anderson, it was during Hefton Anderson's administration that the town and I parted as business people. Hefton hit me one day and he says, we're having a party out at the town garage. He says, we want you to kick some money in. No way. I bid these jobs, I don't pay nobody off.
Yeah. Yeah.
I lost the highway work.
Well,
Then I used to do all of the school work.
you mean like
All-
snow plowing or?
Ball fields and all of that stuff. Christ, I used to put the ball fields in and anything that they had to do. At that time, the school department had to do their own maintenance work, fix their own driveways or lawns or anything. Today, it's the highway department
does it.
does about all of it.
Just have one last question for you, because I think our time's about up, and that is, what used to be up where Wilson Park is now before the Navy built the housing? What was that up there?
That from what you know where Jim Flynn's office is?
Right, right.
From there, right down to where Wilson Park is, right here to Main Street.
Right.
With the exceptions of God, there wasn't anything there then. So that was all a Babbitt farm.
Okay.
The
Was that
Babbitt-
tied in with Cocum's Cussack now?
That was it was when I was small. It was called the Babbitt farm. Then the Babbitt sold it, and geez, I can't think of the guy's name that bought it out, and then they called it Cusset. And that used to be a big dairy farm.
Must have been, yeah.
Oh, they had, oh God, they had 5 or 6 trucks peddling milk all over the state. Fox, a man by the name of Fox, he owned it. And then just before the Navy had it, of course the farming business was going to hell, and they got financially in trouble, and they sold where Wilson Park is now. The Navy came in and took that for the housing project.
Right. Yeah,
Then, oh, there was a guy named, what the hell was his name? He was a representative from Warwick in the State House, and he bought out where Flynn is, that plat in there. He platted that off.
Was that LeBeau?
No, LeBeau took over from this guy. What the hell was his name? He lived out on Route 5 up in Warwick. He was an old fella. He bought the Babbitt farm, and after he started that development there where Flynn is, he got a couple of the streets in, and then he went into bankruptcy. And then LeBeau came in. LeBeau bought out what he didn't develop.
I see, okay.
And that's where LeBeau came in and finished building out there.
Was Post Road widened because of the military impact here, or was it always 4 lanes? It's always been 4 lanes as long as I remember.
No, that was all done before Quonset came in here. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it. I think we gotta give up our place, but it's certainly been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it a lot.